So what did we find out this week?
So I observed the amount of times that vanity came up in how often I communicated to somebody how right I was or how much I knew. And it seemed like it was related to a perception I had that whatever situation I was in, whatever person I was talking to, for some reason I thought that they had some control over me, or because they were saying some things that I didn't want to hear. Like one woman went on about her religion and was sort of like proselytizing, and I could have let that go, but it pissed me off.
In other words, you were disturbed.
I was disturbed, right? Right. But that's the form it pretty much it pretty much took. Either telling somebody how much I knew one way or another, or yeah, that's the most recurring thing I observed.
Nothing about greed.
Not really. I thought about it, but I didn't really see the relationship. It was mostly fear.
Didn't see or didn't want to.
I didn't want to.
Because part of vanity, no doubt, is that I'm not greedy.
Oh. Yeah.
Isn't that what most people believe?
Right.
Everybody else is greedy. I just want what's mine.
Good. Absolutely.
I would recommend looking at that as well. Really would. All violence comes from greed. You know that? Every time you do something that is violent, it's of greed. So if you'd like to maybe lessen the violence on planet Earth, it'd be nice to see how greedy we are. Anything else?
I saw greed and I saw vanity, but I didn't see a connection. I had like separate lists. There was one case, the vanity that I saw had to do was work, and no one should ever think I'm less than absolutely a paragon of all the employee virtues at work. And so the greed was for, they have to see me this way.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of fear, like what if they don't?
Yeah.
So that I saw the connection, but then there was a lot more greed stuff that was just like, the signs on the freeway ought to be easier to read and stuff. I couldn't see where it related to vanity. It's just life ought to be more convenient for me. That was it.
Anything else?
I usually cut myself twice a day, almost always with a girlfriend, defending myself, jumping up to say, no, that's not the way it is.
Did you say twice a day?
On average, twice a day. I talk to her all the time. Didn't really talk to her today, but I didn't notice it.
I'm hard of hearing, and you're chewing a pen.
Yeah,
I
usually
don't
twice
think you
a
want
day.
to talk to me. What?
Usually twice a day.
Did anybody else see pride a little bit more frequently than twice a day? Is that no or yes?
No. Yes.
So I got two answers.
No.
You asked about pride?
Yeah,
Yes.
more often than twice a day.
No, probably about.
Oh, come on, Becky, this is pride right now.
Right.
You started to say yes, and since no one else did, you decided to defend yourself and put up a pretty picture of being very conscious and aware.
Right.
So is that the second time today? Or is that maybe the 20th time today? That you decided to lie to make self look better than it really was?
I don't know if it was the 20th, but it was probably more than the second time.
See, I think you guys are not very observant. How many times when you're with people do you tell stories in such a way that it puts you in a better light than you actually have?
All the time.
That's vanity of the problem. You have no reason to do that. It really makes no difference. In fact, what's the point of telling a story if all you're doing is trying to present to other people a false picture of you? You don't want them to know you. You want them to know somebody else. So that's vanity and pride, isn't it? And that happens all the time. Almost every time somebody tells a story that involves themselves, it's always changing, isn't it? Because there are certain parts of the story you've told the truth. Wouldn't put me in the best light. This is a really crucial thing to see. So, I'm glad that you saw what you saw. I'll try to make light of what you saw. I think it would be good. Okay. Anything else?
I saw a lot of stress and a lot of stress and discomfort, disturbance. I tried to make a seventh decision and be more aware and open, and all I saw was a lot of stress and disturbance.
Because you didn't make a seventh decision. You decided to shake it.
I'm overwhelmed by stress and trying to make changes in my life that are honest.
What I said, I guess, was completely disinterested. Is that correct?
Mm.
He was ignored.
I had something else on my mind I wanted to say.
So what I said was not interesting.
My need to say what I wanted to say was stronger than my need to hear it.
Anything else?
I saw there was also water resistant to this particular.
I can't hear.
I saw that there was.
I've got water in my ear on top of being hard of hearing.
Oh.
Just took a shower or something.
Okay. I saw that there was a lot of resistance to this particular experiment.
Good reason to do it, huh?
Yep.
You do understand the point of doing this, huh? Do you? Did you see the value in this experiment? So if there's resistance to it, that's an even better reason to do it. Because where does the resistance come from? Not wanting to see self in a bad light.
Right.
Yeah.
I just thought of something. If somebody gives you terrible directions so you get lost, and then you look it up in the map book and get yourself even loster, but when you get there and you tell the person what happened, you just say that somebody gave you bad directions. Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
You just leave out the part where
Sure.
you lost yourself?
It's not my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. I just followed directions.
Okay.
That's a lie by telling them part of the truth, right?
Right.
And it's harmless. It makes no difference or what. I mean, something like that makes absolutely no difference.
Which is harmless, the truth or the lie?
Telling them only part of the story
Oh.
and saying I had no responsibility. You know what's scary though? Is that we then believe it. You tell that story about 3 times, and you're going to forget that you got lost too. It's still fairly harmless, so what? So I think I'm much better at reading maps than I really am. It will just catch up with me every time I have
Next
to read
time.
a map. Right. Life will go on. But what if it's about something that doesn't really matter? And that's what's scary. At least if you're going to tell lies like that, you should never lie. So you should be conscious. See what I'm saying? If you really have to do something like that. I mean, I can sort of understand. I probably wouldn't tell a client that I can't read math. You know,
So I wasn't a client, this was a thing, it didn't matter.
if they're paying me a lot of money to do a job, I probably won't tell them I'm so stupid I can't read math. You know? But I would like to keep it in mind that I'm lying on purpose and not believe a lie. You see, the difficulty that we face with vanity is that we have vanity for a very simple reason. You must have some image of self. That's absolutely essential. And you don't know what you are. So since you have to have an image, you make one up. And that's where you come from, as if that were you. Because you don't know yourself. As long as you have vanity, you never ask the question, what am I? For me. You may ask it, but you won't think it needs answering. So you'll ask it as a question somebody gave you the answer to. You'll find out for yourself. Because that's what vanity does, is it substitutes your knowing. That makes sense? I have to have an image of self. If I don't know me for real, then I make one up. And that's what we've all done. And it makes life really unpleasant because we have to live up to it. So I'm not free to be wrong. It's one of the biggest statements that vanity makes all the time is I'm always right or in the right. One of those two things. In other words, the position where I am right now is perfectly proper. That means I can't move. I'm already in the right place. I can't afford to move. So vanity works against almost everything that we work. Almost every single aspect of the work that you try to do, vanity comes along and tries to keep you from moving. I already know everything, so I don't need to learn. So my idea of learning is to memorize a bunch of answers so that I can know that too. Not to make discoveries for self. Because that would be admitting that I don't already know. I have to approach this as this is a fact that someone told me. But since I don't know it for myself, it's going to be an opinion until I try to prove it wrong. Then I make discoveries. I not only get the idea real clear to myself that that is a fact, but I learn a whole lot of other things proving that fact can't be disproven. So vanity sort of makes it very hard to do that. So I think probably this is another one of these experiments that would be worthwhile to do for a while. Okay. Until we can get a real good idea of what the picture is that we're working on. It's like everything else in the human being. You make up this image of yourself, and then it goes unconscious, and you figure out what it is. You walk around acting as if it's true, but if somebody asks you, you have a heck of a time describing yourself. You have to think about it. Now let's see, what is that image I'm trying to live up to? I forgot. So it just becomes part of the world that you report to X all the time. That's what you're always telling X about you. This thing called vanity. Vanity is based on five simple ideas. Say, I am important because. One of them is, I think I know what ought to be. What could be and what should be. That's one of the justifications for my being important in this world. You see, you all think you know what ought to be, but I know. That makes me pretty valuable, doesn't it? Because you're all wrong and I'm right. I know what could be. You're just guessing. So that keeps me real important, doesn't it? Think of how many times that's the attitude that you take when everybody else is giving their idea of what ought to be. And you're standing there arguing that your what ought to be is the right one. So you got a room full of people who all know that they're really important in this situation, as they and only they know what ought to be and what could be. Except they disagree. So it's a good thing I came along, huh? Because you guys would have done the really wrong thing if I hadn't happened by with the right ought to be. The other one, oh yes, I think I know what I need. See, that supports greed, doesn't it? As well as vanity. And what everyone else needs. So I'm perfectly capable of giving everyone advice. And God help you if you don't take my advice. Boy, will you hear about it. If you come and complain to me 2 or 3 more times about that thing I advised you on what to do on, boy, are you going to get blasted if you didn't take my advice. Isn't that right? After all, I told you what to do, and you didn't bother to do it, but here you are bitching at me again. So I know what I need, and I know what everybody else needs. That makes me pretty important, huh? Anytime there's a problem, I know what we need to fix it. I know what I need to be happy. The only problem is I keep getting it. And then finding out I'd like to unget it. Right? That makes me very important, doesn't it? I know these things. Everyone else is just guessing. But I know what I need. And I'm always working to get what I need. Except the fact is that most of the things that I say I need, I don't need. Because need means you will die without it. That's what need means. What you actually know is what you want and are getting. And you define that as a need. And make it very important that you get it real quick. Or you'll die. And so you go into terrible emergencies over absolutely nothing. Most people don't know what they need. It takes most people a lot of time to come up with the fact that they need food and they need clothes and they need shelter and they need transportation. They have to think about that for a while. Try it sometime. Try asking people what they actually need. And see how long it takes them to come up with an answer. It's really funny. It's a very amusing experiment. And you'll be surprised at some of the other stuff that gets in there besides survival things. What I need to survive. And very few people has it occurred to them that one of the things that they need to live is the teaching ideas, including many people who come around to these meetings. They want it, but very few people realize they actually need it for survival depending on it. And you can see it in the way that they work with the ideas. I think I know the cause of everything. I think I know the cause and the effect of this and what is to blame. Well, again, that makes me very important because everybody else, like I said, is just guessing. But I know the cause of this. That's another one of the things that we walk around using to support this whole thing called greed, vanity, and pride. I can look at just about anything and I know what's to blame. Yes, ma'am.
So your opinions are vanity, then?
Oh, God, yes.
Oh, I just didn't quite know what to look for. That
And the last one is, I think I know the future. In other words, if you give me just about any situation, as long as it's not important to me, I can tell you what the outcome will be. Isn't that right? I know that if things were just like this, then we would have an entirely different future than the one that we're headed towards, which is going to be a disaster. It's the only way that you can ever say you made a mistake, is that you know what the future will be. Even if you have some terrible experience, because you don't know the future, you don't know that that might not have been the best thing that could have happened. It may have delayed you just long enough to keep you from getting murdered. No matter how terrible the experience was, it may have been what saved your life for all you know. Because you don't know what could have been, even though you say you do. You don't know the future. But you can say if only that hadn't happened, then all these other things would have happened instead, because you believe you can know the future outcome of this event. But the fact is you don't, do you? That terrible situation may have saved your life. It may have gotten you to go home 45 minutes later than you actually did. Somebody else died on the freeway today instead of you. Or maybe the accident didn't occur because you weren't there. You just don't know, do you? But we believe that we do. I know the future. So the sum of these are, I am always right and in the right. And God help you or anyone else who ever demonstrates that I might be in the wrong. Now you can see that someone with these unconscious attitudes is not going to learn much of that. Because every time they find out they need to learn something, it threatens them. It threatens vanity, which says, I already am in the right, and I'm always right. Because the way that you find out you need to learn something is by being shown to not know it, which we say is being called wrong. So pride immediately rushes in to defend self, find something to blame it on, either something in self, because most of the defense of pride comes from decisions number 5 and 6. Vanity and pride are primarily made out of decisions 5 and 6. The other decisions play a part. But this was our attempt to wake up the grown-up mind, get it to function. Except the only thing that we ever found to use it for was logic. Logic, more or less, is a series of if-then statements. It's more complex than that, but that's what most of us do. If this, then that, which leads me to another if-then statement, doesn't it? Now I have a that, and well, that's now the this, so if this, then that. Now I know the outcome of all things. I know what ought to be. I know what could be. I know what should be. I know the future. I know what people need because I know if they had this, then that. And that's our idea of what to do with the grown-up mind, is to have a cause for everything and an effect that follows. Except there is no such thing as cause and effect. It's not as simple as if this, then that. Because the this is not just a simple little thing. It's about 5 billion things in relationship, isn't it? And so this may look very similar to some other time, some other experience, but it's not the same as some other time or some other experience. So whatever I learned in that time and that experience may not apply. Because I may be not seeing a relationship that changes this very, very much from the last time I used logic. And so my that ain't going to follow. Because that's the big difficulty with logic. You have to be absolutely certain that every premise and every bit of data and every assumption that you work with is absolutely true. Because the first bad, faulty premise or assumption or data that gets in there, then you get a wrong that. And everything from then on is now wrong, isn't it? So logic has its place, it has a value. But only if you're willing to be very, very careful to make sure that all of the data and all of the assumptions and all of the premises that you're using to think with logically are completely accurate and fit the circumstance. And I know very few people who have the intellectual integrity to do that. Isn't that about right? To make absolutely certain that our premises, most of us can't even tell you what the assumptions are that we're using. That's one of the first things I learned about programming. Always write down your assumptions, because they're going to bite you in the ass someday. You base this whole series of logic, which is what a program is more or less, on certain assumptions. And if anybody ever changes an assumption on you, the program just stops working. And you don't know why. Because you forget what your assumptions are like that. No, right? Well, that's a difficulty in programming. It's deadly living. So, but that's one of the things that we do. Most of us are unable to say what assumptions we're using at this moment. So I don't think we've been careful to make sure that they're accurate. And we can't even say what they are. Much less being careful to make sure that the premises and data that we're using. Okay. That isn't even the only thing that the grown-up mind can do. It's just the only thing we've ever learned to use it. So this gets us to see everything as a sequence of events so that we can believe all of these things. You see, if you consider, almost all these are based on logic, aren't they? I know the future because I can say if this, then that. I know what I need because I can say if I had this, then this would happen. I know what ought to be because I can say if it were like that, then such and such would happen. It's all based on logic, isn't it? And a belief in cause and effect. Now, if it turns out that cause and effect is not true, then our logic is useless anywhere but in certain circumstances in the man-made world, isn't it? Where we've intentionally limited things to be logical. The most outrageous example of that is computers, because we modeled computers after the way that we think. So they're stuck with this. They can't do anything but this. But there are other things in the man-made world where we've limited things to the point where logical thinking is effective. In most of living, it's not effective at all. because there is no cause and there is no effect. But it does keep me always being right. Boy, do I want to be right. To the point, like I said, where most of us feel attacked when we find out we're wrong, even if nobody else did it. Even if we just found out all by ourselves that we were wrong, we get a sense of being attacked. Because I want this more than anything else. This is part of being on that, trying to work with that fourth level that we just don't understand, because I really, really believe that if I were just right and just knowledgeable enough and just in the right place at the right time all the time, then my life would be okay. I'd be safe. So anytime I find out wrong, I'm wrong. I get this terrible feeling of what? Insecurity. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
It hits me right on that fourth DBU. Oh my God, now I'm shown to be inferior, I'm not safe anymore, all hell is going to break loose, just like it has in the past when things turned out really bad. I'm in for it now. But as long as I can go on believing that I'm right or in the right, I can get a false sense of security and safety and believe that it will all work out. And I can afford to sleep my life away because I'm safe. That's really what vanity and pride are telling me. Because you're right, you can afford to sleep. It'll be okay. You made sure that you fell asleep in the right place. And from here on, it will just work out. It's really what vanity and pride says. Except it just never seems to work out that way. Okay? Any questions or comments about this? Get a bit more of a feel for this?
Yeah.
No other questions or comments? What we could do now is maybe take a little break and we'll do something else. Okay, any questions or comments? Nope. Nope. I want to move on next week. Just telling somebody I don't think I've ever spent so much time on so little material. So if there's anything that you haven't gotten or experimented with, it would probably be a good idea to bring it up today. Okay. I'm going to kind of summarize what we've done so far. And next week we'll do something different. The end result of all the stuff we've been looking at is that one can say that I was entirely in a dream. The dream seems very, very real to me because I'm constantly responding to it. At least X is. The response is usually inadequate, of course. So I'm very often looking at the things that I do and say, gee, things just don't work out very well for me a lot of the time. But the fact is I'm living in a dream whether I see it or not. I'm living in a dream of who I am because I do not know what I am. And if I don't have some kind of image, I must build one. I have to respond to everything that happens in a picture of self, don't I? I have to have some idea of what I want, where I'm going, what likes and dislikes I have, what preferences I have, what my desires are, and so on, just to respond. So if I don't have an accurate sense of me, then I've got to live in an illusion. I've got to build one of those. And once it's built, I can't tell it's an illusion anymore. That's what we've been looking at with vanity and pride. When something comes up and contradicts it and says, this is an illusion, I can always find something to blame it on. I can either blame it on me and then set about fixing it, or I can blame it on something else and set about fixing it. So I don't have to take responsibility for living in a dream, because I always have something to blame, an explanation, in other words. A story says, here's why, here's the cause, here's what's to blame it on. And I live in the dream of what's going on. Because the not eyes are telling me what's going on. I don't actually know. I spent a lot of time looking at the way the not eyes constantly are making suggestions to the self about what's going on. And what that amounts to is that as a perception comes in from the environment or from the body, it triggers an association in one of the many minds that I have. The one thing that I haven't done is talked about the linkage between what decisions are in which minds, but you don't really need to know that to understand this. But in one of the minds, which is really all one mind, it's just that unfortunately the mind, like everything else, is fragmented into several different minds. A very infantile mind that sees all sensation as a stimuli that must be reacted to. A childish mind that mistakes feelings for sensations and therefore reacts to events in the environment based on the way I feel about them. It doesn't react to the event at all, but actually believes that the feeling that happens when I judge that event is a real thing. And then further believes that if it could just get a new feeling or hold a belief in the mind strongly enough, that it would then change the environment, because the environment, after all, caused my feelings, so there must be a correspondence back, because that's what magic says. So if I can do some magical thing in here, then it will change the world. And I don't have to do anything other than this little magic trip inside here. And then the logical mind that sees a cause for everything and says, if only I could change the cause, then I would have a different set of circumstances. But at any rate, some association comes up. And one of these little not eyes jumps up and says, this is like the time when. Well, the net effect of that is that I am no longer in this moment, I'm in the past. Whether I believe that or not, that is the fact. And I now actually believe that I am experiencing the same thing that I experienced before. I can see that it's slightly different, of course, which is why we don't see how strong this dream is. But I take the suggestion of this non-I that says this is like the time when I please them and they stop disturbing me, which goes up to the little chooser, as a thought. It says, I think I should please them. I believe I should smile at them. And that will change the way they act. And so the I is actually living the past moment when it actually worked, when the decision, in other words, was made. that smiling at people in a certain way will get them to treat you well. So I tell X that I am in some other moment in time. I re-describe the environment when that decision was actually made. X responds with whatever thing that I think I ought to do. And the response is inadequate because it only worked in that last moment, maybe 20 years ago. It may or may not work this time. Maybe that person isn't influenced by smiles. Some people are, some people aren't. So the response is inadequate. I'm out of balance. I get a terrible feeling inside in the pit of the stomach that I've screwed up again. I immediately find some way of dealing with it from some other suggestion. And off we go. Until some strong stimuli comes in from the outer world that gets me onto another track. It's called living in a dream. It's called not running your machine. The machine is functioning fine. It's just got some pretty rotten input, some pretty rotten programs. And it doesn't have an operator. Instead, it has a chooser that tries to please both the side that wants to live by survival, which is outer violence, and the side that wants to live by justice, which is primarily inner violence, although these days we pretty much manage to externalize the outer, the justice side, so that it commits a lot of outer violence as well. As well as making me feel bad that I can't live up to my own ideas of how it ought to be, I also impose those same ideas from the justice side on everyone else and commit a lot of outer violence even with that side these days. The dream is primarily that I am an adult, which is not true. I do have a grown-up body. I do have some education. Unfortunately, much of the education I have is wrong, just as a lot of the beliefs that I formulated in childhood are wrong. But by believing that I'm an adult, I am actually an orphan. Because my true state of affairs is that I'm a child who never really grew up. Since I'm unwilling to experience being a child, because that terrifies me, I have no father. So I'm living life as an orphan. I think it's being an adult. But when a child actually needs a parent and doesn't have one, they say they're in a very sorry state indeed, called being an orphan. Isn't that right? And that is my state. By convincing myself that I am an adult, I have tried very hard to do without having a father. I've tried to do everything myself. And the only way I can find to do that is to live an illusion of always being right, always knowing everything, and struggling to find the how of all things so that I can do what is not my job to do, called the how. And everything in this work is about understanding that I don't know how to do anything other than a few technical things in the man-made world. It's not my job. There's another part of me that knows how to do that job if I would give it a chance and see that this thing called the Father exists in my life. And start being a child instead of an adult, an orphan who's pretending to be an adult. That doesn't change my relationship with the outer world. In the outer world, I have to go on acting like a grown-up, even if I am a child. There are very few people in this world who would let me be a child with the body the age that it is now. And the truth is, if I could find somebody who would, I'd run like hell. They're scary because I don't want to stay a child. And that's what that person would be offering me, is that I can depend on them rather than depending on another part of myself, which is an inner spirit that I can have a relationship with, that actually wants me to grow up. This father wants the kids to grow up, unlike most of the fathers and mothers that we run across in the outer world who seem to wish that their kids would be dependent on them forever, so that the fourth level of the DBUs would be gratified in them. And someone would need them. This father knows that you need him. He doesn't want you to need him. It's just a fact of existence. You can't even breathe without his help. So he doesn't work to put you in a position of dependency because you're already in a position of dependency. What he actually wants you to do is grow up and do your job as independently as any awareness function can, which is not very. Because no matter what, we'll always be dependent on X to supply us with the energy, the know-how to get everything done. But we're not even trying to do our actual job, which is where we can really see that we're a child, which is to determine the what and allow X to do the how. All of the not-I's are telling us how to get what we want. So we're trying to be what we're not. Something that is not dependent on spirit, which is just another part of me. So by refusing to experience our true state of affairs, which is that I'm a very young child that has not grown up in the real world, but may have grown up in the man-made world, some better than others, of course, but in the real world, we're all children. Except for very, very few human beings on planet Earth. By being unwilling to experience that, we've made ourselves orphans. Mind just blank. I have a theory that you might be interested in checking out. When we lived in more agrarian societies, people had kids, amongst other reasons, because they needed workers. Isn't that right? That's not really the case anymore for most people. A few people still have kids because they need workers. Most people have kids for their own pleasure, because they want something to need them. Then, of course, after a few years, the kid still needs you, but it does get old enough that it knows how to tell you that it doesn't like you very much occasionally. So we may get that feeling of need satisfied, but we're not getting approval out of it, so we have more oftentimes. We swear them off completely or whatever. But the point that I'd like to make is that we have conditioned the kids in the last 100 years or so to believe an interesting lie. Can you see what that is based on what's been said so far?
I believe that their parents need them.
Yeah, that may well be that it's not really about what I'm talking about at this moment. Don't we believe that childhood is a time of fun because adulthood sucks? How often have you heard someone say that to a kid? should be enjoying your childhood. It's short, it doesn't last, and one of these days you're going to have to take up the terrible burden. I mean, that's what's implied, isn't it? The terrible burden of adulthood. Enjoy your childhood while it's here. It's not a time of work. It's a time for fun with some work thrown in. That's what we've all been conditioned to believe. Even if your parents didn't hand you that line, the society that you live in has. And it wasn't that way, was it? For most of us, childhood was not a time of fun. It was a time of hell with a little bit of the fun thrown in for most people. Isn't that about right?
Yeah.
So when someone says, be a child in the inner world, we unfortunately have a lot of very odd beliefs about childhood. And we don't consider that idea very well. Because we already know so much about what it is to be a child. Well, the fact is that childhood is a time of great work. Because it's the time of development. Adulthood is when you use what you've developed. In childhood, if you have fun while you're doing it, great. But since we don't really need or even really allow children to be workers anymore, once they're physically able, we develop some very odd ideas about childhood that are simply not true. Childhood is a time of tremendous work. For one thing, it's a time of learning. Nobody arrives here who doesn't need to learn. So the biggest duty or obligation or responsibility of childhood is to learn. Now, the first education you got gratis wasn't very good, but you got it free. As far as you're concerned, you had to work at it a bit. This one is entirely up to you. There's very little that anyone else can do other than simply give you the ideas that you can use to educate yourself with. Because this one is about learning not to be conditioned. The last education you got was really training, wasn't it? It was to condition you to be able to function in society. Because society has some very heavy demands on us. It's not childhood anymore where they just hand you things for free, more or less. This education in the childhood that we're talking about here, which is very hard work, is about being responsible to use the body that you came here in, which is not easy. It takes a lot of work to use these bodies. Because unfortunately, they're pretty much able to survive without you. All they need is your presence. And other than that, they can pretty much do it by themselves. So it takes tremendous effort to become present in the midst of an animal that is functioning at least to the level of survival without you. But it has a dream that there is a presence already there. So one doesn't even really often see the necessity for it other than the fact that it isn't functioning very well. Because of that little thing we talked about earlier, that it's always living in a past moment, doing a past thing that it has already learned. It's not really learning very much new. It's basically relearning the same stuff over and over again. It's not learning anything new. To learn something new would be first to unlearn all of this, other than in the technical world where we can still learn things new occasionally. But in our inner world, in the real world, We're not learning anything new, we're just relearning these 7 decisions over and over, really 8. Master decision over and over and over again. So, that's not learning. This learning is about first unlearning what you think you already know. In other words, finding out what you actually know and what you just thought. Okay. That's called preparing the way. That is true childhood. What we've talked about so far, while it may seem very difficult, is kindergarten. You see, you go to kindergarten and you're taught some very simple things that are prerequisites to going to school. One of the biggest of them is following directions, because most people, apparently, when they get to kindergarten, can't follow complex directions. If you tell them to do 3 or 4 things in a row, they will do the first one, perhaps the second one, and by the time they get to the third, they've forgotten what they're doing, because they got all bogged down in the details of doing the first 2. So in kindergarten, if you'll remember, you were given a number of sequential things to do, so that when you got to first grade and people asked you to do more than 2 things in a row, you'd actually be able to do that. That's called kindergarten, isn't it? You're not really learning what school has to offer yet. You're just being prepared to be able to learn. And you're also given a lot of stupid fucking rules, in my opinion, to also train you to be able to follow rules, which is necessary when you have a bunch of conditioned people together who are quite violent, have to work together. Well, that's what we're doing now. This is all kindergarten. This is not even doing anything yet. This is called preparing to be able to educate yourself. And you do that in the beginning by finding out all the things that you need to unlearn. That's really all we've been doing so far. Saying, here are all the things that you think you already know. And if you'll work with these, you will find many more. This is not a complete list. It is a very small partial list. And until we begin to see that these are not true, we can't learn anything new. Because what there is to learn contradicts what you already know. So it can't be learned until you unlearn what you think you know. In this dream about the only feelings that we ever have, here we call emotions, they're basically variations on the theme of anger, fear, guilt, and insecurity. They motivate us to get more, so that we won't feel them anymore, because they're quite unpleasant most of the time. Occasionally we enjoy them, but most of the time they torment us. So we work even harder to get the things that greed tells us we should have, which of course ends up getting us more out of balance, so we have those emotions even more. But the two provide us with tremendous motivation. Unfortunately, the motivation is to get, not to learn. Vanity, telling me that I am always in the right or right, says I know. And as long as I am in a state of knowing, I cannot learn. I just don't see the need. The only thing that I'll admit to needing to learn is how. Isn't that right? What I'm always asking is how. And my job is actually to provide what. And I rarely ask that question. So we spend a lot of time describing what's and saying if we can get into the habit of seeing what and asking what is going on instead of how do I get what I want or need, then we might be able to get some real work done. Again, it's preparing the way. Can we start seeing in terms of what, which is my real job, instead of always asking the question that comes from vanity that says, I already know everything except how to control things so that what I say will actually work. I know how to do everything except to get those other people to do the right thing so that my ideas will actually work. So I'm constantly looking for ways to control other people to get them out of my way so that I can have a nice stress-free lovely existence. I don't see that what's really going on is not that I need another how. I've already got plenty of those. That's what this is all about. All these not-I's are the how. What I actually need is to start doing my job and provide an accurate what. We need to start providing to X a proper description of what is going on here, not this illusion built by the dream that I'm living in a past moment. And I desperately need to find a new value system that is not based on sensations. This value system that I have that is all based on whether or not the sensation that I'm experiencing right now is pleasant to me on all of the four levels is not working. It's destroying me. It's keeping me completely out of balance with reality. Because that isn't what life is about, just sensation. That's a very minor aspect of life. And we're treating it as the only thing that there is. I rarely learn because there's something to be learned. I learn because learning makes me feel good. It's for the sensation that I get when I learn. I don't value learning in and of itself. I do the work because it either makes me feel good or because this moment is so bad I believe the work might get me out of it and I need to get a better sensation, not because I value the work for itself. So what is actually needed by a person in this state is the ability to describe the what accurately and to value it in a way. Can you see that based on what you have experienced so far? That's what's needed. Not new hows, but a better what. Better just because it might be proper, it might be accurate. You got a question? No. That's where we're trying to get to. That's the preparation of the way to get a person to see in a slightly new way that says, I don't need a better how. I don't need a new method of fixing or solving my problems. I need an accurate description of what because I don't have one right now. I don't have an accurate description of me. I don't have an accurate description of what I am. I only have an illusion called vanity. And I have a terrible valuing system that says that the only thing that is valuable is sensation. That's what I need. The ability to describe what's going on as accurately as I possibly can, and the ability to value some other way than the way I do now. I hope that at this point you've experimented with this enough that you're beginning to see that that's what you really need, regardless of what vanity is telling you that you need. It's wrong. You don't know what you need. It's very clear when we look at this picture. I don't know what I need. The thing that I need more than anything else right now is the what, and I'm looking for the how. The how to get what greed tells me is what I need. Okay. That's not what I need. What I actually need is to be able to do the what well so that I can work with this incredible being called X who knows how to run the machine, except that I won't tell him what to run it for. So there's nobody home. There's just a bunch of childhood decisions about how to get something called sensations that are pleasant to me and how to escape sensations that are not pleasant. So what we can do, because the only of these things that we call the 4 DBUs that can be changed is the last one that we may give a word to right now. I call it transcendental because it is the only one that can be changed. The physical level will always be the physical level. On the physical level, in order to survive, you will always need a certain amount of pleasure and comfort and a certain lack of pain. Now, you can live with some pain. But if the pain is telling you that you're about to die, you better do something about it. That's an accurate assessment of reality, isn't it? That certain pains must be dealt with now because they're an indication that I'm about to die. They're telling me that the organism is dying. There's nothing really much that you can do about that. That's just the way it is. We'll always require a modicum of pleasure and comfort just to survive. We can deal with a certain amount of discomfort and still survive. We won't, of course, but we can. And some pains will always need immediate attention. The only thing that we can really do with the physical level is to understand that I don't need 100% of the gain side and to never or have 0% of the escape side. That's the only thing we can really do with that. The same thing with the mental level. I need a certain amount of attention. If I don't get any attention at all, I go nuts. Now, who amongst us doesn't get a certain amount of attention as we go about our daily living? This need is met, except that we're obsessive about the sensation and we only want to have certain kinds of attention and never want to have other kinds of attention called being ignored or rejected, which is actually getting attention. It's just you don't like that particular kind of attention. Believe me, when someone rejects you, you've got their attention. Most people, when they're ignoring you, you've got their attention. They're probably working very hard at not paying attention to you, which means that they are. Some people actually do manage to ignore you, and not even though you're there. But most of the time, when you're ignored and rejected, you are getting attention. You just don't like the particular kind of attention you're getting. And on the emotional level, it's the same way. We need a certain amount of approval, very little, but a certain amount. Most of us are getting it. It's just not enough because we want it 100% of the time, and unfortunately, we're also getting a lot of disapproval, and we can't handle that. But you can. It's just like on the physical level, I can endure a certain amount of discomfort, and it doesn't destroy me. I can take a certain amount of disapproval, and it won't hurt me one bit. I can take a certain amount of being ignored and rejected. Sometimes I want to be disapproved of, and I want to be ignored and rejected. I actually work to get those occasions because I don't like somebody who's giving me the other side. I want them out of my life. This is the only level that can change completely. The fourth level that we've never given a name to this little series, but perhaps we can call the transcendental. It's called that because it can be changed by rising above. That's why it's called transcendental. You can rise above what you are doing with it now, which is the constant urge to have enough power to get constant pleasure and avoid all pain. And you can start saying, I don't need that power. That's not what I need in my life. And you can learn to do something else with that part of yourself. So that's why we've been paying so much attention the last few weeks to the seventh decision, which was made almost entirely on this level that says, I am important. We've been saying one thing that we simply must do in order to go on, to prepare the way to make the work possible, is make a new seventh decision and simply replace the old decision. The rest of the not-I's, there's not a whole lot you can do about them. They're all based on these other ideas about how to get this. Really, only decisions 5 and 6 have anything to do with the transcendental level. I'm not saying 5 and 6 only had to do with that. They also tell you how to get physical pleasure and emotional pleasure and avoid being ignored and so on, all right? But we can stop trying to be important. We can stop making things important, saying that getting something is necessary to my survival unless it's food and I'm out and I'm about to die from hunger. Even food I only need it occasionally, isn't that right? I eat it much more often than I need it because I don't enjoy the sensation of hunger. So I'm trying to avoid pain. The fact is I only need to eat probably every couple days. Isn't that about right? I could get by that way, except it would be unpleasant. So I eat several times a day to try and keep the sensation of hunger from getting too unpleasant to me. So we've changed a lot of things, even that we need, into gratification and don't treat them as something that is needed, that we go and get when it's necessary to survival. We go and get them for pleasure. Most of us do that with clothing. There's a lot of clothing we actually need to satisfy society, which says that you can't be naked. I don't know why it's considered a very bad thing. So much so that our word for embarrass means to be naked. Isn't that odd? The most horrible thing in the world, which is to be shown to be in the wrong something so that everyone else can see how much you were in the wrong, means to be naked. Nakedness is just the worst crime you can commit on planet Earth. I think it would be better to, well, there is a society where it is better to commit suicide, to kill yourself, than to be embarrassed. That's how strongly some societies have made that. Right? There are places on this planet where it would be better to murder yourself or another person, if you could get away with it, than to be naked. Crazy, isn't it? But at any rate, most of us have a lot more clothes than is actually needed to satisfy this requirement that we can't be naked and to deal with the environmental conditions that we're in. Isn't that about right? Most of it is for our own pleasure. We would just die if we were sitting in the same place 2 days in a row. Many of us, not all. And on and on. Look at what we do with transportation. All these things that we need, they're no longer needs, they're things to gratify sensations. So this is called preparing the way again. To say, this is one thing I can change now. I can start looking at the constant need to be important and to make other things important and say, that is not what I want to do anymore. This part I can change. This stuff I'm kind of stuck with. When this changes, when the way I use the transcendental level changes, I learn that I can now use the other three in an entirely new way. But until this transcendental level has a new way of functioning, I'm just stuck with the 4 DBUs as they are. There's really nothing I can do about it. Because they are based on telling me what I need to survive. I do need to pay attention to them, or I die. So that's why we've been talking about for a while making a new 7th decision that's based on an understanding that it is not a how that I need, it's a what. Yeah.
I don't quite understand. There's something here about power. I don't understand the part about power. I mean,
Why would you want to be important? What does important say? It says that I'm necessary to the existence of another.
yeah.
Isn't that a tremendously powerful place to be? I am necessary to your existence. If I can con you into believing that I'm necessary to your existence, boy, am I powerful. And let's face it, half of business is about doing that, isn't it? It's about conning some other company into believing that I, and only I, can satisfy what you need. And we do it in our relationships. We want to be needed by that other person. That's one of the strongest desires that we have when we're in a relationship with another person. That's all about being important in their life.
In my case, it's not really about being needed. It's just about being so wonderful you wouldn't want to let go of me, you know? But it's not about being needed per se.
I fail to see the distinction between being so wonderful that you wouldn't want to let go of me and needing me.
Okay.
They sound like exactly the same words to me.
Okay, so you want to be important. Basically, wanting to be important is wanting to be important to other people
And
so
self.
that
And self, but primarily to others, yes.
so that they will then gratify your every
That's right.
whim.
That's exactly right. They'll need me enough that they'll be willing to do their job, which for some odd reason they're just not willing to do. I keep telling them that their job is to gratify everything that I want for me, and they just keep thinking that that's actually my job to do for them, because they're actually the one who's important. It's just the weirdest damn thing, no matter how many times I tell them. They just can't get it through their head. They're there to gratify my needs. In return, I'll do a couple things, you know. Vanity, again, has a tendency, because, you know, around here we have a tendency, just like, not a tendency, let's face it. We boil things down to the utter simplistic level, which is about as rude as you can get. Okay? We just sort of say it exactly as it is. Vanity doesn't do that. It's doing all these things, but it puts it in words that I can accept, that don't put me in a bad light. Now, if I were to walk up to somebody and say, okay, here's the game we're going to play. I'm going to find some way to get such a place of importance in your life that you will die if I leave. I can't do that. That sounds really disgusting, doesn't it? So I say things like, I'm going to try to be such a wonderful person around you and make you so happy that you just couldn't bear to leave me. They're the same statement. But we've dressed it up so it's very pretty now. It takes some work sometimes. I'm glad you asked. I'm really glad you asked because I think probably everybody's sitting there not seeing that relationship as well. But all those times when you're working really hard to do what you call good and noble, please someone else, what you're really trying to do is make yourself so essential to their lives that they'll die if you leave.
Well, they think they were just the same.
Well, of course. And we're doing the same thing ourselves by making things important to us, which of course means that someone can play the same trick on us. The minute I make something else important to my life, in other words, necessary to my existence, which is what important means, then I'm setting myself up for somebody else to come along and be a supplier of that thing. And I will believe that I need them, and if they leave, I will die. But that's the thing that people who play this game of power don't understand. By getting power, what you do is make someone else dependent on you. And now you're dependent on them. So you've actually been enslaved by gaining power. And all power is about that.
So you're enslaved by the people who buy your
That's right.
thing.
That's right.
It's so hard to convince people to buy it.
Is just as much a slave, no matter how much of a tyrant he is, as the subjects are. Because if he ever displeases them too much, they'll kill him. It may look like an enviable position to be the tyrant. We're not talking about vanity which says, oh, I would never want to do that. But just looking at it, being able to just sort of snap your fingers and everybody jumps, it sounds pretty good, until you realize that all those people who are jumping are a lot more than you are, and if you ever tick them off too much, they'll just go off with their head. See, people play the power game. Nobody is really in power. Everybody's a slave. And part of what we were talking about when we said one of the misconceptions that we have is that we live in a created universe. And that turns out not to be true if you really understand what's going on. Is that I have never created my own world. Which means I only have two choices about where to live. I either live in utter chaos, which is what uncreated means, because all creation is about imposing order, right? Once upon a time there were a bunch of raw materials and you brought them all together and put them into a certain order, and now you say you have a new created thing. It's about imposing order. So that's what uncreated means when we say that we live in an uncreated universe. It means you live in a place of chaos. Anything can happen, and it does. There is no order there, except the minimal amount that life imposes just to keep the game going. Your job as an expression of this living spirit called X is to be a bridge between the worlds of spirit and matter. In other words, to bring order into the physical universe. We're not doing a very good job, but that is the job we were brought here to do. To be a bridge between the two worlds of spirit and matter, and bring order from life into the physical world and create a world, which means it lives by order. The other option, the other way you can live in an uncreated universe, is to live in someone else's creation. That's the other way that you can deal with this. Unfortunately, the only way to do that is to be subject to them. It's their order, not yours. So in either case, the thing that we want more than anything else is power. Power to stop the chaos, or power to deal with those who subjugate me when I slip into somebody else's created world. What never seems to occur to us is that what we really need is the ability to create. And you cannot create as long as you know. that stops all creation. Because the creative part comes from the first force, which says, you may know what you want to create, but I know how to do it. By knowing, you prevent X from doing the how. That's what I mean by being an orphan. So you continue living in an uncreated world. Now, if we consider childhood actually is a time of great effort, it is not a time of carefree living without responsibility. For the first 12 years of your life, that's what it was, because you couldn't be responsible. From then on, forget it. Whether you're a child or not in the real world or the man-made world, past the age where the body can be responsible, you are responsible, whether you take charge of that responsibility or not. Childhood is a time of great effort and a thing called learning. And the primary thing there is to learn is to be responsible. What we do all the time is blame, which means I'm not responsible, something else is. Something in me or something outside of me. But I'm never responsible for what I did. If we can accept being a child, we can stop being an orphan and start working with spirit and have a father for a while. So this is a very strange relationship when I think about it, because eventually that father wants to marry. Very odd. Wouldn't go in the man-made world, would it? But at any rate, we can start working with spirit. Okay? And that simply says, I'll do my job. I'll describe what's going on. I'll stop trying to change it and just describe it. And let X provide the how in working with it. All the stuff that we're describing in what seems perhaps to be some detail is nothing compared to X's perception of it, because X knows exactly how it works. And it isn't that much detail, is it? Because it says this is what's going on, but it doesn't say very much about how it actually works, does it? But if we can see the what clearly, X knows what to do about it. By making a new seventh decision, some other time, says, I want to live, I want to be awake, whatever words you want to put on it, that starts looking at all the things that is being reported to X unconsciously in the light of that decision that says, is what's being reported right now promoting living? Or is it promoting sleeping and gratifying urges and believing only in sensation? Is it promoting learning? Or is it promoting knowing? Is it promoting learning about the what? Or is it promoting knowing about the how? Then we start to create a separation here between the chooser and the I. That seventh decision stops being just another not I. It tells the chooser what to do, and it starts talking directly to the I. It stands between the I and the chooser and evaluates every single thing the chooser says. And eventually we get a little distance and you're not identified with it anymore. Because I don't value it anymore. The not-I's all tell me they have the power, the knowledge to get what I want. And I don't want that anymore. So I'm not interested in their power or their knowledge. And I break this incredible identification and start to question what the mind thinks. And now we can be said to have prepared the way. Now there's a little bit of space where the I can start to do something. Are there any questions or comments about that so far? What I would like you to do is to look at the things that we've talked about in this review. I believe in cause and effect. We talked about four forces. I believe that I'm a certain way called vanity, and we've described very clearly what that way actually is. I believe that I'm one and the same person all the time. The teaching says, no, you're not. You're a billion people. And there are walls between each and every one of them. Every one of them lives in their own little cell, so they have no idea there's another one there. You think you're consistent, but you're full of contradictions, but the walls keep you from knowing that. And so each of these ideas that we've talked about in review and say, how many of these have I actually experimented with, and how many am I just thinking about? Have I made a new decision to serve as an aim for the life so that I can do the work and not just think about it and feel bad because I'm trying but can't? Can I make some new decision to look at every suggestion that comes from yourself through? And really I can only do that if I experiment enough with these ideas that they begin to show me that the dream is a dream. So then I can start to say, I want to wake up. Why would I want to wake up if I don't know I'm asleep? I want to live. Why would I want to live if I don't know that this is actually death? See, I can't make that seventh decision without a little bit of work. Because I actually think that my only problem is that I'm unhappy. And that's not true. There's a lot more going on than just being unhappy. Unhappy has itself a cause. It is not the cause. You're unhappy because you believe life is about sensation, and it's not. It's just that simple. And look at all these things that we've done in review and say, what do I need to experiment with? Try to be as honest as you can. Because next week, unless
If you didn't need to be important or special, you have no need for vanity. Is that true?
no, that's not true.
So-
You have no need for vanity when you are remembering self. Without some awareness of self, you have to create a false picture. You must have something, some kind of image of self at all times. Because it's always me responding to events. If I have no sense of me, a human being can't even function.
What I sort of coming out of an observation, we talked last week about intelligence and why I'm so afraid I don't have any.
Yeah.
And when I look back at where I got the conditioning, it's not that I was told I didn't have any. I was told that it was really important. Other people made it important.
Right.
That I have lots of this stuff, and therefore I'm constantly wondering if I've got enough or don't, because it's so important.
That's teachers and parents' ways of getting you to fulfill your potential, is to tell you what your potential is and then insist that you actualize it in a certain way.
Yeah.
Very odd behavior, isn't it?
And
I mean, God forbid you should go find out what your potential is by learning what you actually enjoy and want to do and then actualize it in your own way. You must live up to your potential.
yeah.
And they know what it is.
In my case, it was you must make me feel good about being a parent by being so special. You know, you must validate me somehow.
Yeah.
So since it was impossible to do, you know.
And the teachers do the same thing. I mean, that makes them feel good as teachers when they have a student that's really getting it, and so they reinforce it a little bit.
Wasn't near as strong though.
No,
Teachers weren't near as.
but all I'm saying is you don't even get a contradiction. So
No,
you get all
it was
this stuff.
important to everybody.
That's
Yeah,
right.
it was important to
There's no
everybody.
contradiction
Therefore,
to it. So
important
why
to me.
would it be questioned?
Yeah.
It is perfectly understandable. And then it just becomes the way you see things. So it takes incredible incredible effort just to even see that that happened to you. Just to see what was done to you. And that's the outrageous thing. You didn't even really choose it, you just went along with it. Not knowing any better because you were a child. You didn't know what the outcome would be, so it was really done to you practically. And yet it takes tremendous effort to even see what was done to you.
Yeah, because it becomes part of you, it masquerades as reality, and
Right.
you just can't see it.
That's exactly right. And then the other thing is that we're all in such inner anguish at not being able to live up to all of these ideals. That doing the work becomes very hard because almost every time I look at anything inside, what I see is my own hurt at not living up to all these ideals, and I stop because my purpose is to never feel hurt. And I go back to looking for the power to get what I want without having to know self. Knowing self hurts in the beginning. So you get enough disidentification that when you see something in yourself, it stops hurting, and it just provides the energy to add it again and to do what needs to be done about it. At that point, we say it's just a shock. It's no longer a terrifying experience. But we know how much pain is inside of us, so every time we look at it, we're afraid that if we go into it, we'll never be able to come out. So we never get to the point of it being startled. It's always panic. And of course, the thing is that we look at the people who went before us, who were talking about this, and they look like they're doing relatively well, maybe, depending on how advanced a student they are. Some of them look like they're doing great, some look like they're doing okay, and somehow we imagine that they've always been that way. Because anyone who does anything well makes it look effortless. So it never occurs to us that maybe they had to deal with exactly the same thing that I'm dealing with. They made it through. The panic just runs us. If we're willing to admit that people who've done this before us probably started out in just as terrible a state as we did, and had just as much panic and fear every time that pain came up that they wouldn't be able to deal with it. And we would see that there, if you just go through the fear, it turns out to be groundless. Many times we won't even try. That fear comes up. I'm like, God, if I go into that pain, it'll ruin my life. I'll never get out of it. I know how hard it was the last time I got into this pain. It took me months, years maybe, to get out of it. We're doing the teaching, you know. That's another very powerful force that makes doing the work very hard. We'll do simple things that don't hurt very much. But unfortunately, what that means is that we learn ways of improving ourselves instead of doing the work. Because most of the simple things you can change. So you actually don't do the work with them. You see them just well enough to be able to change the habit. They're not that powerful. They don't run you that much because they don't scare you that much. That's what simple means. Do you know that? It's the things that don't scare you that much. The ones that are harder are the ones that terrify you. You can't change them because you won't look at them well enough to see what there is to change. So when you do that, you end up learning a new way of self-improving called half-assedly using the work ideas, the teaching ideas. And one day you discover that you've cleaned up all the simple stuff, and all that's left is the stuff that strikes terror in your heart, and you don't know how to do the work. Boy, is that an unenviable place to be. I've seen a lot of people get there. Wouldn't recommend it. It's hard. I've worked with a lot of people at various times when they get to a place that's just terrifying to them. And trying to be there with them while they go through it so there's at least some company. Because a lot of times, we can go through a scary place if we have company. Isn't that right? But a lot of people won't take up that offer. Think that that would embarrass them to let somebody else know, so they can't even use the offer of company as they go through it. So we have a tendency not to deal with the things that really frighten them. But my personal recommendation is that when something comes up that terrifies you, that you at least look at it as best you can until the fear shuts you down, which it will do. And when it comes up again, which it usually will very quickly, you look at it again until one day it simply doesn't terrify you, but don't turn away. You'll find that you're not very good at actually doing the work because you haven't prepared the way. Mm-hmm.
How, this may sound dumb, if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, well, what have I not been looking at because I was terrified and I can't recall any episodes of actually being terrified, so then I think, well, maybe I'm just hiding it from myself, and so what, is there something to look for? I mean,
I can maybe tell you a way to do that, but maybe a little personal. Do you want to do it later?
sure.
That's the only way I can think to do it is to give you an example.
Okay.
It doesn't say that you're supposed to feel terrified. If you don't, fine. I'm just telling you something that I've seen in an awful lot of people. I'm not saying it has to be this way. So if it's not that way, then it's not that way. But I have seen this in an awful lot of people. If they start to look and get very, very frightened, turn away.
Are we talking about seeing a behavior that we know is destructive, or that I repeat continually, that I see?
Well, the fact is you don't know it's destructive. If you knew it was destructive, you wouldn't do it.
I see the pain.
You say you know it,
I see.
but you don't. That's called vanity. If a person truly knew it, he wouldn't do it.
Even if it's the habit that vanity tells you
Even
need to
if it's
do.
a habit, you can use all the excuses you want. But the fact is, if you really knew that was destructive, you would lose interest in it, habit or not. You're saying habits are more powerful than you are. You're losing all the sense of responsibility and saying, now I have something to blame it on, I have habits. So anything that's become a habit, I'm helpless. I don't have to take responsibility for it.
The pain of stopping it,
The pain of what?
stopping a habit that you feel
That causes tremendous pain. One of the best ways I know of to be in pain is to resist a habit. One of the worst pains I know of is guilt, and that's basically what you're saying, is that you're saying this habit is bad. You're claiming that you know that it's destroying you, which is not true. You're lying. But you're claiming that it's bad at any rate for whatever reason, and resisting it, and that produces guilt. It's one of the most destructive emotions there is. It will absolutely destroy you. It feels terrible. If guilt gets bad enough, you will be in bed, unable to move. And you'll have a clinical thing that human beings call these days depression. And you'll have some little symptoms that anyone can diagnose, and now you can be insane. And it all comes from saying, I know what I do not know. I know that this is bad. And being unwilling to look to see what's really going on. So the very thought of dealing with it is terrifying. And it's all based on a lie. I know this is bad. You don't know that. I've noticed many times that what people call bad, while it may well be destructive, is the only thing that's saving their life. So they're trading a slow death for a quick one. That's not my idea of bad. With a slow death, I have a chance to do something. With a quick one, well, that's it. But you know it's bad. That's what alcoholism is. It's trading a slow death. Alcohol will kill you, but it takes a few years. Whereas the inner feeling that the person is drinking to get rid of would kill them overnight if they didn't do something about it. But you know that drinking is bad, isn't that right? You're wrong. It saves people's lives. Kills them in the long term, but they would have died in the short term.
But ultimately, you want to.
But, huh?
Ultimately, you want to stop drinking in order to be alive. In other words, the drinking prevents you from being alive.
You can say that if you like, but all you're going to do is stop drinking and you won't be alive. You may preserve the body, but you ain't going to be alive. I worked with one hell of a lot of alcoholics in my time. And I noticed that when they come to me, not one of them knows why they started drinking, what the actual reason for drinking was. They've never bothered to understand themselves well enough to see why they drink. What's going on with that? What's in relationship with it? About the best they can tell you is that they drank to deaden the pain. And you say, the pain of what? And I say, I don't know. All I know is that I hurt all the time. I don't know what it is. That's not living. That's the big problem that people face when they go to 12-step programs. They get rid of the habit by replacing it with another habit called going to 12-step programs. Mm-hmm. Well, that works. I think that's wonderful. They don't deal with the inner state of being that generated the necessity for the habit in the first place, which is killing. And so typically after about 4 or 5 years of sobriety, they feel empty. Because they still hurt, but they can no longer drink to deal with them. And they don't know what the hell to do. And a lot of them, what they end up doing is getting very addicted to becoming important in the organization of the 12-step program they're in. And that importance eventually satisfies them. And now they're really dead. There's no hope for them. It probably would have been better that they went back to drinking and doing that. Because once you find a way to actually be important, there's no hope for you. Because that's the part of you that can be changed. And now you can't change it. It's the only thing that's keeping you alive is using it that way. So you can't make statements like that. I've been trying for weeks now to get you to see that what you believe you know is a load of crap. It's based on partial information. You see 1/zillionth% of what's going on and you make statements like that. And torment the hell out of yourself doing it. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing the best that I can to wake you up, but your idea of dealing with it is to argue with me and insist that your point of view is correct. You did it earlier when I attempted to offer you something that could have shown you the way out of what you insisted on saying, because it was so important to have your say, and you did it now. I offered you a way of looking at something, and you offered me a but. It says, Phil, you're full of crap. My way is right. It's up to you to do the inner work that will allow you to get through this vanity that says you know so much. I know you believe that you don't, because there's one thing that you desperately want to know and do not. So everyone sitting in this room believes that they're not vain, because they're constantly thinking about what they don't know and not noticing how much of the time they claim to know. Because there is something you desperately need to know and do not. And that's how to control things so you can get your way. You don't know how to do that. You know everything else. And I think you're wrong. I think you don't even know the everything else. When a person wakes up and realizes that I don't know, then they can begin to learn. As long as they know, nothing you can do for them. Except sit and wait and hope that one day they realize they don't know. Okay? Any other questions or comments? Let's take a 5-minute break, and there's one more thing I want to talk about before we go. One of the things that I would highly recommend that you do, even in the technical things that you do, is start practicing saying, I don't know that. If you think about it, that's how you learned everything that you learned in the technical world. You may not have said, I don't know, but you sort of said, I'm not sure. Isn't that right? You had some ideas, but you weren't really sure which the most effective and useful of them were, so you tried some things. Isn't that how you learned the things you learned in the technical world? Your job and so on. So here's a bunch of stuff, theories that I've been given. I'm not real sure just which one fits this situation. I'm not real sure how to apply it, how to use it. So you try a few things out. It's called experimenting, isn't it? Why should it be different than the rest of your life? So we could just practice saying, I don't know. Just declare an hour of time every day where you're going to say, I don't know to everything that comes along. You know, pick some time. It won't be too big a deal. Just everything that comes along, say, I don't know. On the inside especially. If you want to say it on the outside, that's okay too. But on the inside. So everything that runs through the head, you look at it and say, I don't know. Just practice it and see what that experience is like. See if it's as frightening as you imagine it to be. Maybe you'll find out that it does interesting things. Puts you into a whole different place when you say it. The other one is what I'd like to point out. That these different levels that we experience things, pleasure and pain on, physical, mental, emotional, because very few of us have feelings, and the transcendental, as we're calling it now. Each of us, at a certain point in our life, decides that one of them has greatest value. Because that's the way we always make value decisions. Everything is relative value, okay? Something is more valuable than something else. As we go through these things, each of us ranks these in an order of relative value. It says one of them is much more valuable to me than the other. It would be quite interesting to see if you can look at the light and say, which one of these do I absolutely have to have? I cannot live without that one. So I have a lot of people, as I talk about the 4 DBUs and talk about gaining and escaping, and they say things like, well, I don't think the pain is that big a deal, physical pain. You may have even remembered that people say that in various times when they talk about it. What does that mean? It means that person has perhaps put that one fourth value. So they can deal with a little bit of physical pain as long as whatever is first value is being gratified. Because everything has a relative value to us. But what's the one that you cannot live without? What's the pain that you absolutely cannot, or will not, I should say, experience? Even when it happens, you will not experience it. Depending on which of these are put as first value, which is put as second value, actually determines the type of personality that you have. Thus, there are actually only 12 different kinds of personalities on planet Earth. I imagine that everybody's personality is different. But, yeah.
I can see valuing sensation, attention, approval, but,
Well, they're all
Or-
sensation. What do you mean by it? You mean physical?
oh, excuse me, pleasure,
Close.
physical
Yeah,
pleasure,
comforts.
attention, approval, but isn't the last one just the desire to get all those others? I mean, there's the feeling of importance is its own thing.
Yeah, although it does have its own gratification.
Okay.
It does have its own sensations. And some people, I mean, more or less, I guess what you're saying is that you don't put tremendous value on that, perhaps.
No, I'm just trying to understand it at this point.
But some people think that just the sensation of being needed and feeling important is the most valuable thing
Okay.
there is, and they put that over feeling comforted. Because it does have its own sensations. I mean, if you think about the way that you experience being needed, I mean, if everything else is satisfied, if you're fairly comfortable and you've got some attention and you're being approved of, and then you add on, this person needs me. It has its own sensation, doesn't it? It's really different from these others.
Okay.
And if you're ever around someone who is willing to provide comfort and attention and approval, but doesn't tell you they need you, you can see what it's like to experience the other side, the pain side of that. That's the biggest problem that I have in relationships these days. I forget very often that I'm supposed to need the person that I'm with. And the odd thing is that that'll destroy a relationship faster than anything else. I give people a lot of attention, a lot of approval, a lot of comfort, occasional pleasure. But I don't need them, and I know it. And I don't like being needed. I don't even enjoy being around someone that needs me. But a lot of the relationships that I've been in have been real messed up because I'm not very good at pretending to need people. And that's a very important thing, that sensation of being unneeded means we don't have a relationship as far as most people are concerned. No matter how much attention and approval and comfort they get out of it. Because this means
You can go away.
you could leave at any moment. You're not committed. You don't need me, so I have no way to ensure that you'll stay. So then that scares people into the feeling that they now have to make sure that they're always giving you all this stuff because they feel that that's the only reason why you're there. Because you don't need them. And that's too heavy a burden for most people, and I can understand why. I wouldn't want that burden either.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem to occur to them that maybe they're going to want to leave. You have no intentions of ever leaving. Which is not to say that that won't change, of course, just like everybody else. But you don't have to stay somewhere because you need someone, or you need it. But it has its own sensations. Okay? So it would be interesting just to see which of these are made first and second value. Now, one of the reasons for doing this, I'm going to tell you this ahead of time, which means that, of course, you work very hard. If it's true, not to see it, because it's not going to be a pleasant thing I'm going to say. But one of the most difficult things is that this is either first or second value.
If it is?
If it's either first or second value. If it's third or fourth, you can probably deal with it. If it's first or second, it's extremely difficult. Because you're using the part of yourself that can change, but you don't want it to. So doing the work becomes almost impossible. I'm not even sure that someone who puts this at first value, this number 4 thing that makes this first value, can even do the work. Because the first thing that we need to do when we start doing this work is obliterate the urge to power. Yes?
I'm beginning to think maybe I'll just shut up and ask later so people can go home.
Okay. Now, I won't say that as a fact, because I don't know. I haven't made an intensive study of this. It's a theory to me at this point, because I haven't really tried to prove it one way or the other. It is something that I have been told, but I just don't know for myself. I do know that even when it's placed at second value, it makes the work very, very difficult. It's very hard for someone who wants to be needed to say, I don't know. How can you be needed if you don't know? How can you be important if you don't know? Most of being important is what I know, so that I'm the one who can fix this situation, since we all have problems. So I'm only saying that if you do find it in first or second value, that you realize you're going to have to work very hard. And folks who do that tend to get very mistreated by those who play the role of teacher, because they've got a hard row to hoe. You can't give in to that at all. In fact, I've noticed that most people who play the role of teachers tend to discover which of these the person places as first value, and they will not give it to them under any conditions. That's the one that they will not give. Because it means the person will stay only for that reason, and they won't do the work. It's the only thing that matters to them. So it would just be an interesting thing to say, what is it for this one that drives this life? What is this one always attempting to do? It tends to be in this sense. Ones that are given third and fourth value, I can sort of take or leave. As long as these are doing pretty good, then I'll pay attention to those. You see, that's the way it works. You got to get the one that has first value satisfied first. When that one is satisfied, then you get the second one. When that one is satisfied, then you'll work on the third. You see, so often they never get to the fourth. Unless, of course, it screams really loud on the pain side, when it gets our attention. But this is what drives us. This is what controls our lives. It's the desire to get whatever these two that we place the first and second value has our constant attention. It's very hard for us to put the attention on anything else. Yet we must. Because that's really the only thing that you have at this point developed enough that you can do something, isn't it? So you do have the ability to put the attention on something that you choose. You have trouble keeping it there for very long, but you can't put the attention where you want. That's one potential that you would, as an awareness function, have actually developed to some degree, isn't that right? Now, how long you can keep it there, of course, is another question. But this is the thing that makes it difficult for us to put the attention wherever we want, because this always grabs the attention. Because we're trying to completely resist the pain side that we're experiencing now at these levels, whatever those two are. And we're very greedy for more and better and different at the gain side on these two levels. So the attention is just constantly on that. If I can see it, I may be able to break that spell. Start saying, well, just how valuable is this? Yeah, I like it, it's okay. But I don't know that I'll die without it. Any questions or comments? I don't really like